This reading is from Censored number 116, and it's entitled This Country Was Never a Christian Nation by William J. Eisenman, PhD. Let's try to understand one thing right off. If the United States were a Christian nation, it would have no poor. It would not have representatives like Scott Garrett, Republican of Wantage, New Jersey, striving to enact laws that would require food stamp recipients to work. While 75% of food stamp recipients are children under age 18 and 25% of recipients already work. In time, when jobs are scarce, this attitude is stupid. And at any other time, it's a result of a character defect that comes from an ideology that is devilish. Greed and self-righteousness. A character defect lauded by the novelist and philosopher Ayn Rand. Darling of Republican Congressman Paul Ryan. Rational selfishness. Stupid. Quote, this is a quote, stupid from Ayn Rand. Stupid, altruistic urges, unquote. This devilish greed is clearly evident in the crop of corporate bribed governors like Rick Scott in Florida, Paul LePage in Maine, Rick Snyder in Michigan, John Kasich in Ohio, Rick Perry in Texas, Scott Walker in Wisconsin, and Governor Chris Christie in New Jersey. These devil-led ideologues are at war with the United States Constitution that demands promotion of the general welfare and the have-nots of the country. Not a Christian trait. The clear and unchristian agenda of these conservative ideologues is to promote and protect the interests of those in power and the haves over the have-nots. Nothing short of class warfare. In their quest to further plutocracy and to not fairly raise taxes on the wealthy, they are cutting jobs in the public sector and social programs that they deem unworthy. In their counterfeit Christian zeal, they destroy state economies, the country's economy, and lives. Republican presidents' share of the federal debt since 1980 is $8.19 trillion. And if we add in the cost of the Afghanistan and Iraqi wars and the bank bailout, the figure would be $9.6 trillion. While the Democratic president's share is $4.81 trillion. And if we deduct the wars and the bank bailout, it's more like $3.4 trillion. President Bill Clinton left office with a surplus of about $125 billion. There was no deficit. Facts are stubborn things. Until 1980, the country's federal debt had not exceeded $1 trillion. And we are now well over $14 trillion. Who are the real fiscal conservatives? In vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. You lay aside the commandment of God. You hold the tradition of men. You reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your own tradition. Mark 7, verses 7 through 9. General Electric pays no United States taxes and receives a $3.2 billion tax benefit. The claim is that corporations like GE are job creators and are blessed by God. Misguided Christians believe that the rich are rich because they are doing the will of God. They are blessed by God. Bible thumping red staters adhere to these platitudes which are not found in the Bible. God's economics are a far cry from our present day setup. Read Micah 4, verse 4. In the Bible, the rich man asked Jesus, "What shall I do to inherit eternal life? I have kept the commandments." Jesus said, "Sell what you have and give to the poor, and you shall have treasure in heaven." The man was sad because he had great possessions. Jesus said, "How hard it is for them who trust in riches to enter the kingdom of God." Mark 10, verses 17 through 24, Matthew 19, verses 17 through 20, and Luke 18, verses 22 through 23. The rich cannot make God number one in their lives. They lack the empathy and compassion to treat and uplift the poor as God commands. God warns in Proverbs 23, verse 4, "Labor not to be rich. Cease from your own wisdom." It has become apparent to anyone who has not been living under a rock for the last few years or so that politics and false religion are alive and well on the nation's Supreme Court. Decisions based on politics and ideology comes before law in influencing decisions for at least 3 of the justices on the court. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, who believes one is not disabled if one can brush one's teeth. Antonin Scalia and Clarence Thomas are the 3 in question. Their character flaws shone brightly in the Citizens United decision, where corporations were granted free speech rights as persons. Corporations can now pour millions of dollars into campaigns without any limits and much of the time without disclosure. Conflicts of interest also reside on the High Court. The 3 justices mentioned are lacking in personal integrity. Quote, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." Isaiah 5, 20 through 21. The Bible speaks of a falling away in the end time, and false religion, a counterfeit Christianity, would abound. The white horse in Revelation. 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3, and Matthew 24. Today it is evident that false religion, counterfeit Christianity, guides the Republican Party. In 2003, the United States spent $417.4 billion dollars on the military, while Japan spent 46.9 billion dollars, the UK 37.1 billion dollars, France 35 billion dollars, and China 32.8 billion dollars, Germany 27.2 billion dollars, and Italy 20.8 billion dollars, Iran 19.2 billion, Saudi Arabia 19.1 billion, and South Korea 13.9 billion dollars. This year, when it's all added up, the United States will spend well over $1 trillion on the military. Who are we afraid of? The United States is responsible for 57% of the world's arms sales. Would a Christian nation that is commanded by God to love its enemies be doing these things? Quote, as a nail sticks fast between the joinings of stones, so does sin stick close to buying and selling. Ecclesiastes 27, verse 2. What exactly is this economic system called capitalism all about? It's a system that we worship in this country. Capitalists can do no wrong. It's our economic religion. But the essence of capitalism is that whoever has the capital, that is money, rules. To be a capitalist, one must have money. Capitalism is a system of economics that benefits those who have money. Yet capitalism isn't a spontaneous order. Capitalism was not ordained by God. In fact, the economic system of God outlined in the Bible is radically different than our capitalist system. Contrary to the Republican mantra, people are responsible for producing wealth. People also consume wealth. As we examine closely the devilish propaganda spouted by Republicans, it is clear that John Kenneth Galbraith was correct in observing that the conservative is engaged in one of man's oldest exercises in moral philosophy, that is, the search for a superior moral justification for selfishness. What is clear is that capitalism produces too few capitalists. President Ronald Reagan played to those who believed that the United States was a Christian nation. Zealots for Reagan paint him as a great patriot, when the facts show that he was the least patriotic president in American history. Reagan's presidency laid the foundation for a new global economic order in which nationhood would gradually become meaningless. He enacted policies that helped wipe out working class, high paying jobs. Reagan's gift to Americans were mergers, tax cuts for the rich, deregulation, privatization, devolution, S&L bailout, and globalization. All of this amounted to a betrayal of working people. The economic system under Reagan was a far cry from the biblical economic system of every man his own land and vine, Micah 4, verse 4. Under Reagan, the battle against inflation included business failures, mass unemployment, the destruction of small towns like Reagan's hometown in Dixon, Illinois. Reagan's counterfeit Christian soldiers regarded the poor as, quote, a bunch of freeloaders, unquote. This attitude did not come from the Bible. This attitude exists nowhere in true Christianity. Yet where were the powerful voices against such lies? Concerning the poor, the economy, and capitalism, Franklin D. Roosevelt said that the test of our nation was not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have little. In 1982, the Reagan administration cut food stamps, welfare, housing aid, unemployment insurance, and other programs for the poor. The administration also tried to throw totally disabled people off the Social Security disability rolls. At the same time, military spending was increased obscenely. Corporate taxes were decreased, and there was a 30% reduction in individual income taxes, which, of course, was designed to benefit the top 2% of taxpayers. Also, the top income tax bracket was reduced from 70% to 50%. Even in the 1980s, General Electric paid no federal income taxes. Did any of those so-called Christians in the administration complain about this blatant immorality, this unpatriotic and unchristian behavior? The silence was deafening. The same playbook is in use today. By 1983, the Reagan administration had lowered corporate taxes from 32.1% in 1952 and 12.5% in 1980 to 6.2%. What is glaringly clear here is that for some 30 years, the rich and corporations have not paid their fair share of taxes. Business ethics disappeared under Reagan, and the government was redirected to the needs of private enterprise. As far back as 1964, Reagan wished to see Social Security privatized. Under Reagan, the blind pursuit of wealth became a supreme virtue. Greed was idealized. Reagan believed government didn't work, and the people he put in charge of agencies were there to eviscerate the regulatory agencies that had been a thorn in the side of the private sector. In hindsight, we know that none of this benefited the poor, the worker, competition, or keeping manufacturing strong and viable. In a Christian sense, the Reagan years accomplished nothing Christian. The Reagan years made corporations, the wealthy, and the powerful more rich and powerful. These tactics cut off the poor and middle class from their government and their right to lobby, as do the fat cats. All of the all of what was accomplished under Ronald Reagan was a deliberate attack on the public sector. The Reagan presidency is easily reduced to a money grab by the upper class. The Reagan administration left no Christian legacy. And, as usual, the tax cuts for the wealthy during the Reagan administration failed to spur the promised investment frenzy. Only paper profits were created. The tax cuts and obscene military spending created unprecedented budget deficits, which Republicans like Dick Cheney claimed did not matter. Deficits don't matter. Under Reagan, the Securities and Exchange Commission was all but gagged. Between 1982 and 1988, there were more than 10,000 mergers. Paper entrepreneurism. None of this created wealth. It only rearranged assets, said Robert Reich. Conservative ideology makes no pretense concerning its blatant pursuit of personal gain and its worship of big business. Their form of capitalism has upended our society. Influence peddling and cronyism infect conservative ideology. Conservative greed is rationalized by believing it is part of the free market, the invisible hand of Adam Smith. By the end of Ronald Reagan's 2 terms, 138 members of his administration had been convicted, indicted, or investigated for criminal activity. If asked, most of these people would claim to be Christians or religious. During Reagan's administration, so much money was thrown at the Defense Department that overcharging became the rule, and taxpayers were on the hook for $600 toilet seats and $400 hammers. Sound like Iraq and Afghanistan of today? This was a deliberate enriching of the private sector at the expense of the public sector. Taxpayers. Reagan illegally sold arms to Iran to support the Nicaraguan Contras and lied to Congress about it. The Reagan administration had a clear contempt for ethics and democracy. Important public information and statistics were censored during the Reagan years, and the press was deceived and manipulated. All in all, the big losers during the Reagan years were children. Reagan, in order to cut school lunch programs, sought to have ketchup declared a vegetable. Programs were cut by 42%. Conservatives love the fetus, but screw the born child. Cutting taxes on the rich does not create jobs. History shows just the opposite. High taxes on the rich is good for the country and the economy. Laying off and firing people in the public sector does not create jobs. We don't have a spending problem. We have, for the last 30 years, a revenue problem. The 2008 financial meltdown was the single largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in at least a century. Bonuses to Wall Street traders in 2007 amounted to $62 billion. Globalization and the devil's economics amounts to nothing more than an international shakedown. And its targets are ordinary people around the world. The goal of globalization is the same goal as colonialism: to service the empire and its class. Around the world, globalization has, quote, laid waste to local economies, unquote. By now, it's plain to see that there's no development with trade expansion. Globalization is simply an imperialist movement. Mark Weisbrot says that we've allowed the financial sector to unilaterally determine economic policy for the rest of us. And they have left us flat broke. The United States has the most unequal distribution of wealth in the developed world. Wages and salaries in the United States make up the lowest share of the nation's GDP. Corporate profits as a share of national income are at their highest ratio since the 1960s. Yet, we keep giving them taxpayer subsidies. In many instances, the global financial system, the devil's economics, has forced countries to use their agriculture for export revenue. Thus, they cannot feed their own people. In 2008, there were 28 million people on food stamps. Capitalism is eating itself. Every import to the United States costs jobs at home. A country that cannot manufacture its necessities is doomed to destruction. If we continue to allow corporations to run amok and the wealthy to accrue more power, democracy will be a quaint word in our brave new world vocabulary. In conclusion, is all the hurt, negativity, pain, destruction of people's lives and economies and countries Christian? Would a Christian nation involve itself in any of this? Would a Christian nation go to war to enrich the private sector? The United States has never been a Christian nation. And not because the Bible is not read in classrooms or because the Ten Commandments are not in our courtrooms. It's because the supporters, the enablers of the people who lack the character of Jesus and support the devil's economics and the immorality of our politics, whose God is money, are in charge. Also, those who believe they are Christian, haven't a clue as to what the Bible demands of a Christian. They want to change the Bible to make it more conservative friendly rather than change themselves. Again, facts are stubborn things. And as long as there is a poor person in America, this country will never be a Christian nation. The end.